This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm your host, Breach Burke. Now today we're going to have two episodes on Aztec mythology, which is kind of rounding out our discussion thus far, at least, on what would be the mythology of the Americas, both North America and South America. And we had talked about Sedna in the Inuit myth, and then also we had taken a look at Zunukwa from the Pacific Northwest tribe of Coatlicue, or the group of tribes in the British Columbia area. So now we're going to take a turn to South America and to the Aztecs, who have quite a ferocious religion and quite a ferocious mindset on the interpretations of the cosmos and the gods, and how that is reflected in ritual life and life, the whole flow of life on Earth. One thing I have often said is that when you have a culture, whatever the culture values, that tends to represent what their chief gods are. So if if agriculture is a central thing, then the Earth Mother might be your central deity. If you have a band of people who are warriors, then war gods are going to tend to be your central deities, and so on and so forth. And in this case, war is definitely part of the whole Aztec mentality, because there's this idea of cosmic battle that's going on. I'm going to say similar. I'm not going to say exactly like Zoroastrianism, because Zoroastrianism is a straight up battle between good and evil. This battle's constructed a little bit differently. And what's interesting is that it places a very high value on the earth and sees the cosmos as kind of the enemy. So the deity we're talking about today, and you're going to have to forgive me, I may have to pause regularly to make sure I'm pronouncing things correctly. My pronunciations may still be wrong. I mean, it seems to me there's all different permutations of the way to pronounce Aztec names, and I've tried to do the best I can to be consistent about either the Spanish or the native pronunciation, but I could be wrong, and of course my American accent is not great with that, so I'll do my best. The goddess we're talking about today is Kowatsika, and Kowatsika is she's the Earth Mother of the Aztecs. And there's two main stories associated with her, which we're going to talk about. But she is a very ferocious-looking deity. So let me describe how she looks. Kowatsika is represented as a woman wearing a skirt of writhing snakes, a necklace made of human hearts, hands, and skulls. Her feet and hands are adorned with claws, and her breasts are depicted as hanging flaccid from pregnancy. Her face is formed by two facing serpents after her head's cut off, and the blood spurt forth from her neck in the form of two gigantic serpents. We have, visions of Tiamat here as well. The serpent goddess who is, cut. In her case, she was completely cut up. In this case, decapitated, referring to the myth that she was sacrificed at the beginning of the present creation. And of course, the sacrifice is usually by a decapitation, although in Aztec practice, often the heart was removed as well from the victim while they were still alive. Okay, so here are the legends associated with her. We see that she's this very ferocious serpent goddess, and we'll talk about the possible meanings of that as we go forward. According to Aztec legend, Kowatsika was once magically impregnated by a ball of feathers that fell on her while she was sweeping a temple, as was her role, and she subsequently gave birth to the god. Okay, let's get his name right. Huitzilopochtli. And her daughter, who is Koyoshaki, then rallied Kowatsika's 400 other children together, because she's had 400 children. She is the Earth Mother after all, and goaded them into attacking and decapitating her mother. Why did she do this? Apparently, this sort of quasi-virginal birth that came from this ball of feathers, it was considered to be an embarrassment of some sort. But now, in some versions, when she's killed, the god Huitzilopochtli suddenly emerges and get grown and armed for battle. In others, one of the siblings feels bad about what's happening and warns the infant in the womb what's happening, and so he immediately springs out full grown and stops his mother from being decapitated. So there's a couple of different versions of this. In either case, this god we have Huitzilopochtli is now, he is a god of war. He's definitely the god of war, and later on in Aztec mythology becomes the chief god of the sun. And a lot of the human sacrifice, he wasn't the only deity for which sacrifice was performed, but he certainly was the main deity in which human sacrifice was, performed to. And we'll discuss the reason why in a moment. So, okay. So what else do we have to say about her? Yeah, that's the main story of her, is that she is that she gives birth to the god of war in this fashion. And of course, she is an Earth Mother. In some versions, she's decapitated or sacrificed, which would fit in with the comparison that I make to the Tiamat legend, in which the Earth Mother is sort of cut apart to, and that sacrifice is what provides life, or what provides an ability to live on Earth. They're saying that some other names of her was Toki, or our grandmother, and another was, let me see if I got the pronunciation of this correct, Siwakoro, which is Snake Woman. And there's another version of her that I had seen mentioned, where she was associated with another deity. Let me find the name. I want to say it's... Plasoltea, who is Plasoltea. Yeah, that's who is the deity having to do with adultery, as it were, like improper sexuality in a different context. Is that right? Yes, and she's sexual impurity and wrongful behavior. Okay, which again, this may have been considered an instance of that, although it doesn't. It's not an instance in which she technically committed adultery, but somehow she has had this kind of association as well. So this is all very, very interesting. How she, there's so much to look at and think about here in terms of this. So, okay, so we see that's her one main story. Now, there is another story, and let me just make sure I have this. Her daughter, who is known as Koyoshaki, which means painted with bells, and probably representing the moon. And the sons, the 400 sons who she rallies, are called the Zenson Tweetnaha. Senson Sweet Tweetnaha. Oh God, Tweetnaha. I'm not. This is the pronunciations are quite difficult here. So, any case, so these 400 suns or whatever, they represent the stars of the southern sky typically. So her impregnation they regard as shameful, and what they do then is they want to rush in and they want to kill their dishonored mother. So they see her as dishonored by this episode. So this is where her son rises to her defense, and his chief weapon is actually a ray of the sun, and he swiftly butchers his unruly siblings and chops up Koyoshalki into several large chunks and lobs the pieces down the mountainside. And in one version, he actually takes her head and throws it up into the sky where it becomes the moon. So this battle is actually quite important in Aztec mythology because this ends up being the central. This becomes the central theme around which their whole religious and ritual life is predicated. So there's a group of again, apologize here because I have to look these up. Kowatsika is considered to be a part of Omadioch, I think is how you say this. Because Toch is the idea of, this is often translated as God, but it tends to be more like the concept of mana that we see. The idea of this kind of daemonic force that's in nature. And they are, in any case, there's some kind of mysterious or numinous beings is the way to think about them. And so their gods are, so again, gods are not gods in this idea. And this concept, I'm just reading about Diach, which says that it's a key element in the understanding of the fall of the Aztec Empire. It seems like the Aztec ruler Montezuma II and the Aztecs generally referred to Cortez and the conquistadors from Spain as Diach. And it's widely believed that this means that they believe them to be gods, but the better understanding might be that they were seen as mysterious or inexplicable. So in other words, there was something numinous about them, and thus they were given a kind of, privilege that maybe they should not have. Okay. Now the actual, the practices that they have with regard to these. So it suggests that there are three main parts of the Aztec world. There's the earth world on which humans lived, the underworld which belongs to the dead, and an upper plane in the sky. And the upper worlds, including where it merges in with the celestial plane, are said to have there are 13 heavens or 13 upper layers and 9 earthly layers or netherworlds. And the first heaven overlaps with the first terrestrial layer, so that heaven and terrestrial layers meet at the surface of the earth. And heaven, in this case, we're referring to, the cosmos, the skies. And each level associated with a specific set of deities. The main deities were the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus. Okay. And they're often referred to as a people of the sun. So, okay. So with this concept and with this idea, the actual practices that they gave in, human sacrifice was very, very common. And just want to look at the ritual here because I have so many notes open right now just to try to cover all of this. Okay, yeah, this is the piece I was looking for here. Okay, so the child of Kowatsika, who is Huitzilopochtli, he is the patron god of the Aztecs or the Mexica tribe, and it says that the legend is that as the sun god, he's in constant struggle with darkness, and of course is a war god, and requires nourishment in the form of sacrifices to ensure that the sun would survive the cycle of 52 years, which is a basis of many Mesoamerican myths. And it was, it's the 15th month of the Mexican calendar, that day each time was captives and slaves were brought forth and slain ceremoniously to Huitzilopochtli. So you have this idea of a sun god who is who requires blood, and so it's interesting because the Aztec religion, even though it has the sun is obviously important, of great cosmological importance, certainly in terms of agriculture and everything else. Although Kowatsika is actually also a deity of agriculture and warfare and so forth, as the Earth Mother. It's as though what she provides is the most important thing, and the sun is one of the most important things, but the sun and the cosmos are seen as emanating out of the earth. That's what's really interesting about this. They emanate out of the earth. So the origin of everything, including the universe, is chthonic. Okay? And the fact that Kowatsika is covered in serpents, she's wearing a serpent skirt. Her hands are serpents. Her head consists of 2 serpents, and she's got human hearts and skulls in a very Kali-esque kind of fashion. I mean, there's all the reality of the Earth Mother right there. I find it whenever I think about the Earth Mother, and I think about conceptions of the Earth Mother as, again, the old conception of everybody worshipped the Mother at one time. There were no gods. And everything was peaceful and harmonious until all these terrible patriarchs came down and ruined everything. And I've mentioned this myth a number of times. And it's still a myth that goes around and that people believe, like, if we went back to the mother goddess worship. And I'm thinking, this story makes me think of the old mother goddess worship. Not just here with the Aztecs, which is a particularly grisly version of it, but you see versions of this also in the Near East, for example, worship of goddess Kybele. Or the Cappadocian goddess Ma. I mean, it's the same idea. And in those religions, not only did you have human sacrifice, but you also had men who castrated themselves and so forth. It was not necessarily what I would call a peaceful religion. And what I think is so interesting about it is, we go back to Freud and his idea of castration anxiety, I think there's some of this, looking at these kinds of Earth Mothers gives us some idea of the root of the fear of the dark feminine, or the fear of the divine feminine, or needing to see a feminine in a sort of sweet, attractive, and more submissive kind of a form. Because that is not what we're dealing with here. Although here what we're seeing, there's something cosmological about it, because it's almost like the Earth is in a war with the moon and the stars. And it's the sun god who's defending her. Which, I don't know, that could also say something about the nature of life as well. The idea that, the mother of everything, sustains her life and sustains her existence through the sun. So there's actually almost some, there's some kind of, biological or ecological truth to that. But the fact that the sun god needs to be continually fed blood. Which is a practice you normally associate with chthonic deities and with Earth Mothers. But of course, the sun in this case is the child of the Earth Mother. So this takes Plato, Plato has nothing to do with Aztec mythology, but when I think of the Platonic idea of the density of the Earth and its impurity and how you want to get away from it and how the superior realms are the celestial ones, and I'm thinking, yeah, this completely turns that upside down. Not that I think we need to go back to a system of regular human sacrifice, but it's fascinating to me because this whole mythology is, it centers around this Earth Mother. Now, the other important thing that we see about Kowatsika is that she's a serpent goddess, basically. I mean, her name means serpent skirt, and her whole or Serpent Lady. That's the other version that I saw. I was just looking at this notes. And, but she has all the things, the flabbiness of breasts that have been, nursed children, the clawed hands and feet, which represent kind of the animalistic form of nature. And her diet is the corpses of human beings, according to this as well. So she is truly the devouring mother, who is at once, as they say, the womb, the creator, and the grave. So this is the Earth Mother in all of her full reality. And the fact that human hearts, this is the idea that your beating heart, your life force belongs to the Earth. There's no sugarcoating this in any way, shape, or form. Because while it's not necessarily that she's an evil goddess, but it's just this reality that just as the Earth, births you and maybe even sustains and protects you, that the Earth also will devour and destroy you. And it was, this is in the Oxford reference. It was somewhat interesting the way they couch this. They say, the earth was Kowatsika. She freely gave to men her fruits, but no person could expect to cultivate a specific portion of the goddess in perpetuity. Officials would rightly declare after 2 or 3 years that the goodness of a plot was exhausted and the time had come for it to be left fallow. So, yeah, there was no, there were no boundaries. You couldn't claim this is my land or my property. Okay, that was not a thing. But it was also understood that you could not just take from the earth in perpetuity. So Joseph Campbell at one time had said, and again, I realize some of the things he says are somewhat questionable, but he had talked about the fact that agricultural societies, or ones that rely chiefly on agriculture, tended to be focused on an earth mother and tended to, and sacrifice of some kind, whether it be human or animal, tended to be part of the whole thing. And this is it. And this is that terrible mother. It's, the life giving back the life. The idea that of blood sacrifice. And that, just as you might offer the fruits of the earth, you would also offer, life in all of its forms back, so that, because it points to a mythology that most of us don't really think about. When I think about creation mythology and its meanings in different cultures, one of the themes that comes up, and again, I'm not the first person to talk about this, but is that life feeds on life. Okay, you can't, in order for you to live, something else has to die. And there seems to be a really a stark awareness of this in this kind of a ritual life, where in order for the life of the earth and the tribe and to be sustained, you had to actually sacrifice other life. So it's interesting. So, you have these, you have this image of the sun. You have this very warlike way of looking at the cosmos. Because if we look back into that mythology that we just discussed about her, what ends up happening is she is, so in other words, what's happening is her son is perpetually defending her against her other children. Okay, that's where the blood sacrifice comes in. He needs nourishment so that he can fight off, keep the stars and the moon from fighting against, from destroying Kowatsika, or trying to cut her head off, as it were. Now, there was another story of Kowatsika that I wanted to look at. Let me see if I can find it here. Because there was there's a second myth that I wanted to mention about her. It says, and this is from World History Encyclopedia, they're saying, another myth involved the goddess. She warned the Mexica of their future demise. The Aztec ruler Montezuma II had sent a party of 60 magicians to visit Kowatsika in the mythical ancestral home of the Mexica, Aztlan, in a quest for supreme knowledge. However, overburdened with gifts, these hapless magicians got bogged down in a sandhill, and the goddess revealed that the Aztec cities would fall one by one. And then her son would return to her side. Now that's interesting, because if she's the Earth Mother, and her son is the sun, then that's an interesting almost prophecy of doom, in the sense that when the Aztec Empire falls, then this would also be the fall of everything. He would return to her side, and this kind of battle would be over, as it were. So, and of course, now, of course, the sun and the moon did not, come together in that kind of a form. However, the Aztec Empire most certainly did fall. And, it's, there's a, so there's this, so she's definitely, so there we have her also associated with prophecy and with secret knowledge. Once again, there's this idea that the chthonic realm is which holds all of the knowledge that can be obtained. So, there's a description here of the statue of her, and the National Museum at let me say this right, Tenochtitlan, and it's they say that she has a figure of her with a severed head replaced by 2 coral snakes representing flowing blood. wears a necklace of severed human hands and hearts with a large skull pendant. A typical skirt of entwined snakes, while her hands and feet have large claws which she uses to rip up human corpses before she eats them. And this may also be metaphorical of the way that which the body decays in the ground. This may refer to a connection between Kowatsika and the star demons, who the Aztecs believe would devour human population if the sun should ever fail to rise. Okay, so again, you have this idea that what we think of as the demonic as not belonging to the earth, but rather belonging to the sky. At the back her hair hangs down in 13 tresses, symbolic of the 13 months and 13 heavens of Aztec religion. Okay. So it was, the statue was discovered in the year 1790, but was thought so terrifying it was immediately reburied. So, it's an interesting statue. Probably in the video version of this, I will actually show this statue. So I think the main thing that we want to take away from looking at this is the way in which the chthonic, as terrifying as it is the most important thing. And when we think about the earth, if we think about the earth in its most natural aspect, if we get away from any kind of anthropomorphizing, trying to make it into... Because clearly, if you look at her figure, you're not looking at a figure that looks human. This is not a figure you can identify with in any way, in any kind of human way. This is, and like the Hindus, in a lot of cases, although there's Hindu gods that have human faces, when you look at the Aztec gods, they don't resemble anything human at all, because they're really driving the point home that these are not just these are not psychological forces. Okay, these are forces. They're dealing with something, far more, definitely far more related, literally, to the earth and to nature, and to the way, the powers of nature and how they function. If you think about the fact that we have, say, hurricanes or tornadoes or snowstorms, we think about all of these things that happen on the earth, the way that there can be droughts, the way that there can be floods. I mean, there's so much phenomenon connected with the earth. Now, in places like, in other places in the world, again, Greece always comes to mind because that's my first, training in that mythology. But, the idea of Poseidon, for example, the sea god, as bringing earthquakes, or Typhon as bringing violent storms, or Zeus as, bringing lightning storms. You have these ideas of, you're really getting the sense that these are... these forces of nature that are struggling with each other, and that are, and clearly the earth is most important, even as the devourer that she is. Okay, she is defended, by her child, who is the sun god. And although when you think about it too, in Greek mythology, Gaia is the progenitor of all the Titans, including Helios, the god of the sun. So, so again, there's a similar idea that, the celestial comes out of the chthonic, that it's the earth, but it's not the earth alone. And this one's interesting because the war god comes from a hummingbird feathers, or a bunch of feathers. Now, the hummingbird is supposedly a very important in Aztec mythology. It was a sacred bird. It was considered to be very important. I'm just trying to find my notes on that. I have there's so many on this, and I wanted to just know what the let's see. They say something about it. I saw some note about it in here and everything that I've been reading over, but I can't find it at the moment. But there has been a mention of the hummingbird as being a sacred animal to the Aztecs. But even just from a strictly elemental standpoint, it's this idea of this being of the air that mates with the earth in a way that's not normal, what we would think of as normal copulation, and produces the god of the sun. So in a way, this is the way in which earth merges with air, and because the sun obviously is in the sky, it's not something that's on the earth. So it's, but again, it's this idea, there's a lot of things about the mythology that I think if they were looked at face value, which I never recommend doing, why would her children be angry at her for having this child? Why is that considered a dishonor? And why, therefore, if she's dishonored, do they regard her as being, acting improperly by having taken the feathers and putting them in her bosom? And, and if that's improper, and that therefore they're going to punish her by decapitating her. Those are the kind of stories that tell you there's clearly more going on than meets the eye. And but it's just really interesting. And I don't know if there could be some reference here to cosmic events like meteors and things like that as seen as a threat to the Earth. The way in which, certain events in the cosmos could potentially destroy the Earth, either plunge it into eternal darkness or maybe in the sense of a meteor shower or something, literally attack the Earth. Because, there's a very, as much as there may be a psychological component to these things, there may also be, these also may be representations of things, just in the way, for example, in Mithraism, we look at the bull, Mithra slaying the bull, or even in the Gilgamesh, the idea of the bull of the moon being slaughtered by a god who seems to have a representation of being like the sun. There's this idea of the struggle between the sun and the moon during an eclipse, for instance, which you will see in these mythologies. And so I don't know. I just find it very interesting because the chthonic is the protected centerpiece here. And the enemies, the sky gods are actually the enemies, with the exception of the sun, who is seen to be connected to the earth and is there to defend the earth. So this gives us a very different view of the way in which, the chthonic realm is viewed. There's no sugarcoating it, okay? You still have this idea of a bloody, devouring Earth Mother. And the serpents, of course, I think as I was going to say earlier, we think about the representation of serpents in cultures throughout the world. Now, of course, in biblical thinking, the serpent is an evil, right? Unless you are practicing some form of Gnosticism, generally, the serpent is considered to be the enemy, the villain, the Satan, or the Samael, the one that is that brings trouble. But in most cultures, the serpent represents life. It represents some kind of, or the continual regeneration of life. Whether it's the Ouroboros, the serpent swallowing its tail, or the idea of the snake that molts or sheds its skin, and therefore it's almost like it leaves, a former shell of itself behind and then continues on. And then, of course, I think it'd be India with the Nagarajas. They're the serpent kings, and that rule the underworlds actually in places that are considered to be more beautiful than the earth itself, like than the upper world. And then, of course, if we think about it in the feminine terms, if you think about the basis of Shakti and the idea of the Kundalini serpent, that is like the Shakti that sits at the base of the spine and rises up to meet Shiva in the body. So the serpent is literally representing that, going through our nervous system. That's a literal force of consciousness moving through the body. So, so the idea that you have an Earth Mother who is just completely, her whole body is made up of serpents and pieces of human body parts like heads and hearts and things like that, shows you the fact that, the Mother Earth is the life. There's your life force right there. There's a depiction of Shakti that, rather being beautiful, is actually quite terrible. But as it's been noted, often goddesses that are scary and terrible looking are sublime. They're pointing to a numinous reality beyond things that's both terrifying and an absolute wondrous mystery at the same time. So, so very, very brutal religion, very much a warlike culture for sure. And definitely the fact that they have this concept of quote unquote gods that is different from, that falls more into the idea of mana, or the idea of this kind of numinous presence, rather than necessarily referring to it as a deity per se. It's more of the idea that these are forces that that humans need to help feed and maintain, and and of course in the most extreme way is that human sacrifice needs to be practiced regularly because we're part of the fruits of the earth that need to be given back to the earth. It's not sufficient just to do animals or to do sacrifices of grain or other fruits. It has to be the people of the earth as well, because again, this is a mythology that does not separate humans from the natural system. So that is all I'm going to say on Kowatsika. And again, I'm hoping I didn't make too much of a mess of all the names and everything, but it is it's quite a bit to absorb. Aztec mythology, as some of you will note, is not my main forte here, but trying to pull out the elements here that I can see that that relate to chthonic religion and that relate to the dark feminine. And this one is quite it's quite stark. It's quite in your face. There's no there's no you're seeing the Earth Mother in a completely uncensored form, as it were. That said, I mean, it's not to say that there aren't more sexual or sexualized forms of goddesses or of these kinds of forces, but this is definitely this is the Earth Mother. And I think I just have one other thought about that too, now that I'm just kind of turning it over in my mind. The idea of her 400 children representing the stars and the moon and things like that makes me think that there's this idea that because also there's a moral component that they add to it. They want to kill their mother because she has acted in a disgraceful manner or a dishonorable manner, which implies a certain marriage bond or a certain sanctity about sex within this culture. But it's interesting that the moralizing is coming from the celestial deities are providing the moralizing here, and about their mother's sexual behavior, and their way of dealing with it, and it's the moon, which is interesting that it's the daughter who is considered to be the embodiment of the moon, who is the one who leads the charge on this. So it's interesting. So it's almost like you see, if you want to take a psychological look at it, or a social look at it, the way in which there's this there's kind of two different aspects of the feminine that's supposed to behave in a certain kind of way with respect to her sexuality, and the one that is just completely, the embodiment of sex and death. And the way in which people, but I mean also the way in which we see that these forces act like that's something horrific that needs to be conquered or controlled. But it's the sun god who appears to say, no, you're not going to, I'm going to protect the earth. You're not going to destroy the earth. So you wonder if that implies a kind of moral judgment on the earth itself. But at the same time, we also have to remember that a lot of these ancient religions, morality is not part of the picture. We always make the mistake of trying to judge ancient religion in terms of our own, or I shouldn't say in terms of our own, in terms of monotheism, okay? Because monotheism is ethical. And these religions, I mean, clearly there's some kind of a code of behavior or ethics here, but the deities or these forces are not, they're not ethical in their inflection. They just represent the forces that are there. And it's just very interesting to me that the Aztecs see the celestial forces as, who are supposed to be representing a certain kind of social or sexual morality, at least in this particular aspect, as being the evil ones who have to be fought off with these human sacrifices. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the Aztecs in the next episode as well, and about the Aztec underworld. But for now, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to check out all my work, please visit Chthonia.net. I post regular updates on social media. Chthonia Podcast, 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Twitter and Instagram. Chthonia on YouTube. If you'd like to support my work, please visit patreon.com/Chthonia for all the details of what you would get for becoming a patron. And I would like to thank my patrons very much. I very much appreciate all the support that you give me and you've given me over the last few years. And with that, I will see you all in the next episode.